International outcry after North Korea launches a long-range rocket. What message is leader Kim Jong-un trying to send almost 1 year after his father's death? And how should the world respond? This is Inside Story. Hello there and a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. North Korea has successfully launched a long-range rocket which it says was designed to put a weather satellite into orbit. The US, South Korea and Japan say it's a test of technology that could one day be used to deliver a nuclear warhead. Harry Fawcett has this report.
2 days after hinting at delays and technical difficulties, North Korea delivered a surprise.
12월 10일
We succeeded in launching the second version of Kwangmayongsang-3 satellite via rocket Unha-3 from Soha launch pad in Cholsan County on December 12, 2012. The satellite entered the expected orbit.
In other words, Pyongyang has a success to make up for the public humiliation in April, when a first rocket exploded just seconds after blastoff and fell in some 20 pieces into the sea. A success perhaps chiefly designed for domestic consumption. The launch's timing is significant. It comes in the year of the 100th birthday of the founding father Kim Il-sung and within days of the first anniversary of the death of former leader Kim Jong-Il. It's bound to enhance the prestige of Kim Jong-un, still short of a year in power.
The successful launch of Kwangmayongsang-3 is our great pride, and I want to boast to the world that it is a great honour for Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un and all of Korea.
This proves our country is strong and prosperous, and the future of Korea will be stronger and more prosperous under the leadership of Marshal Kim Jong-un.
In South Korea, where the foreign ministry condemned the launch, the defense ministry confirmed its apparent success.
For the moment, we know that the first, second and third stages of the rocket worked properly. We're now trying to confirm whether the object that entered orbit did so properly.
Japan's Prime Minister broke off his re-election campaign to deliver his own response.
We are extremely regretful that North Korea forced through with the launch. We cannot tolerate this, and we registered a strong protest with North Korea.
For all the satellite scrutiny of technical problems at the launch site, North Korea has instead made a technological breakthrough in what the US, South Korea and Japan all call a ballistic missile program. Those three countries are pressing for a firm response from the United Nations Security Council. There are two problems, though. First, that North Korea is already very heavily sanctioned and there isn't much room for further tightening. And if there were, perhaps in the arena of financial targeted sanctions, they would require Chinese support.
China is also limited in pushing further North Korea's reaction because it's right there, it's their neighbor. So at the end of the day, China would want more stability in and around its country.
It's also election season in South Korea. Both presidential candidates here say they want an increased engagement with the North. The fear is that Wednesday's launch will only make that harder. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
So, how should the world react to North Korea's rocket launch? Well, to help answer this question and many others, we're joined by our guests in Seoul. We have Kirk, correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor. In Hong Kong, Joseph Cheng, Professor of Political Science at City University of Hong Kong. And in Washington, D.C., Paul Chamberlin, former US military attaché to South Korea, also the author of Korea 2010, Challenges of the New Millennium. Welcome, gentlemen, all of you. Paul Chamberlin, if I could start with you by looking first at this launch itself. On the one hand, we have North Korea saying it was a peaceful launch of a satellite into orbit. On the other hand, it is, of course, being seen as a technical test to mount a nuclear missile. How do you view it?
A missile that can put something into orbit can also be used to deliver nuclear weapons with some enhancements. So from a national security perspective, one is prudent to assess this from a military perspective.
Joseph Cheng, do you agree with that? Is this pure provocation on North Korea's part?
Well, I would not say that this is a provocation, but I do agree that this is part of a plan of developing a nuclear weapons delivery system eventually to reach the United States continent so as to enhance Pyongyang's bargaining power to secure some kind of security guarantee from the United States and even diplomatic recognition. We expect this strategy to continue unless you have some serious breakthrough in the six-party talks. There are obviously very important domestic reasons for this. Kim Jong-un, the young leader, has to consolidate his power. He has just reshuffled the military leadership. He needed to recover the earlier failure in April. He wanted to have an impact on the elections in Japan and South Korea. So there is also a very, very strong diplomatic as well as a domestic case to engage in this kind of missile tests.
And certainly we will be delving deeper into the regional and wider international reaction to it. So just for the moment, Paul, if I just return to you, you said that this is very clearly a sign that North Korea's end goal is building a rocket that can hit the United States. So how big a step do you think this is for North Korea towards achieving that aim?
I think it's a very significant step. And not only is it a significant step from a technological perspective, but it's also from a deception standpoint. Just 12 hours ago, the military assessment was that the launch was being postponed until a few days, for a week or so. So it's successful, assuming it really did happen. It's successful on two significant fronts.
Don Kirk, as Paul just mentioned, they managed to correct the mistakes that they made back in April, where they bungled an attempt to launch a rocket. So what do you read into this about the development and the progression of North Korea's program?
Well, this is a terrific triumph for North Korea. They have launched a couple of these things before successfully. On August 31st, 1998, they did launch a missile that flew over the main Japanese island of Honshu, landing in the northern Pacific. They had a more or less failed launch in 2006, and then in 2009, they had another successful launch. So they've succeeded in launching these long-range missiles. What's different about this one, though, is that they managed to put a satellite into orbit, not only by their own claim, but fully acknowledged by the North American Aerospace Defense Command, which described it as an object that had gone into orbit. So this is really a triumph for North Korean technology and propaganda, and it comes at an extremely timely moment, which I can go into in some detail if you'd like. It's just it's an honor bestowed upon the memory of the late dear leader Kim Jong-Il, who passed away on December 17th of last year. The anniversary comes up on Monday. And it's also, of course, as Mr. Cheng has pointed out, a way of buttressing the power of Kim Jong-il's son, Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be looking closely at Kim Jong-un's position in North Korea just a little later in the programme. I just want to stick with the launch just for a bit longer because on the one hand, Joseph Cheng, we do have some people saying there's an issue of double standards here. If we had South Korea, if we had Japan launching a satellite into orbit, they'd be congratulated. But because it's North Korea, they're condemned.
Well, you may say so. Certainly, every country has the right to develop its missile technology. And at the same time, North Korea believes it has the right to secure that bargaining chip in order to seek some kind of security guarantee from the United States. But at the same time, we have to understand that there is certainly a moral issue. North Korea is in extreme poverty. A lot of the people in North Korea may not have enough to eat. And yet the regime spends such a high percentage of its GDP on military technology. And the whole idea is to use this military technology as a kind of blackmail against the United States and its neighbors. And at the same time, we have to be aware that this technology is also for sale for export, and therefore it will be quite destabilizing, not only at the regional level, but also at the global level.
But just what sort of a threat does North Korea pose, Joseph Cheng, at the regional level?
Well, if North Korea continues to develop its nuclear weapons and its missile delivery capability, then there's a lot of pressure on Japan and South Korea to develop similar technology likewise. And at the same time, at least they will also spend more money on some kind of theater missile defense technology. So in a way, there is a little bit of armaments race in the region.
I mean, South Korea must be bristling slightly. I mean, at the very least, North Korea has managed to launch a satellite before it did.
It also presents a little bit of a contrast because South Korea has failed twice and has yet to send a satellite into orbit.
Don Kirk, if we just go back to the timing you mentioned earlier, sticking with South Korea, we of course got an election looming there, as we have in Japan. Do you think this launch was carried out with those elections in mind?
I certainly think those elections had to have been in mind. There's no doubt about that, although the primary element of the timing would be the anniversary of the death of Kim Jong-Il. But the launch is supposed in some people's minds to bring pressure on South Korea to enter into negotiations with North Korea, and also to bring pressure on Japan to adopt a less hostile attitude toward North Korea. Now, it could have quite the opposite effect. It could heighten tensions between Japan and North Korea, and it also could bring about a response, a conservative response in South Korea, influencing voters who might be undecided that they really need a strong leader, in the form of Ms. Park Geun-hye, who's the daughter of the dictator, the late dictator Park Chung-hee. She's regarded as more hardline. She wants to negotiate with North Korea, but she's regarded as considerably more hardline than the liberal candidate Moon Jae-in. The race is going to be quite close. Voters go to the polls a week from today, but this launch could work both ways in South Korea. The timing is really extremely interesting.
Paul Chamberlin, which way do you think it's going to fall? Do you think it's going to provoke more hawkish candidates to win at the ballot box in Japan and South Korea?
I wouldn't be surprised if it bolsters the progressives, the Progressive Party. The launch surely has a primary purpose, given the timing, of influencing South Korean presidential election. There are a number of South Koreans, I would say a majority, that do not want any kind of conflict with the North. And they're willing to take chances to some extent, but being bullied could backfire. But I think that the North Korean goal, quite clearly, is to persuade South Korean voters they're better off with a president who's willing to engage with the North than with one who is not. Who knows how that'll play out?
Absolutely. I did read, Paul Chamberlain, that you have an idea that one of the key ways of solving the North Korean problem is to look and to focus on a peaceful reunification of the Koreas. Do you really think that is possible in the near future?
Well, what is possible and what is an appropriate approach certainly is open for discussion. We should not forget that the Korean War is not over. And the Korean War is all about what governments shall represent the will of the Korean people. There is no question that the South Korean government represents the will of South Koreans. The extent to which the North Korean government represents the will of the North is certainly open for discussion. I have long advocated engagement with North Korea, but it should be on the basis of three principles. It should be mutually beneficial, it should be transparent, and it should be verifiable. To date, North Korea has not been willing to engage on that kind of a basis. But it's important, and until they are, we need to recognize the war is ongoing and we need to do what we can to neutralize North Korean influence.
Okay. Joseph Cheng, I can see that you're trying to jump in there. What's your opinion to that?
Reunification is probably a rather distant goal. in the first place, the South Koreans, at least quite a large segment of the South Koreans, are not yet ready. They are also concerned with the tremendous cost of reunification, and they are aware of the German experiences. At the same time, many of the regional countries, including Japan, Russia, and China, they are not too happy with a rapid unification too. I think the best intermediate goal is to persuade North Korea to engage in a kind of economic reform program along the lines of those of China and Vietnam, and so much so that it is more interested in economic development and opening up so that there will be more mutual interest with the regional countries, and at the same time, of course, open up the country for the North Koreans to see the world, and of course for the North Koreans to experience an improvement in living standards.
Okay, well, we'll look a little bit more a bit later about how or what approach should be taken to North Korea. First of all, I just want to take a break as a side view, and that's looking a little bit deeper at the man at North Korea's helm, Kim Jong-un. He's been in office for barely a year, but he has been making his mark. He was pushed into the top job after the death of his father, Kim Jong-Il, a position he'd already been started to be groomed for. There had been hopes that the Western-educated Kim might prove to be a progressive reformer and take North Korea into a new direction. But he's made little progress in addressing the country's severe economic problems. It's believed he's given the secretive State Security Department a more central role in monitoring citizens, and he's alarmed many with talk of, quote, squashing rebellious elements at home. Kim's also moved to consolidate his grip on power, replacing senior leaders in the powerful military with his own loyalists. Don Kirk, you were saying just earlier that this launch has a lot to do with the timing of the anniversary of Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-Il. So how much of a credibility boost do you think it is for Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think it's a credibility boost. How much of a credibility boost, no one really knows. A lot of people claim to have some insights into what's going on up there, but I think that the best assessment is that there are several different patterns or trends that we can detect. It's widely believed that Jong Song-taek, who's his uncle by marriage, married to Kim Jong-il's younger sister, really is pulling the strings up there, or that an elite group of people surrounding Jong Song-taek are in control. But who's in power is who's controlling Kim Jong-un is not clear, nor is it clear who really ordered this launch or masterminded this launch. One thing that does appear as rather clear, however, is that Kim Jong-un is not leading the country in a new direction. He's committed so far to the policy of Jongun, which means military first. And that was the policy of his father, and he seems to be perpetuating that policy. Now, we'll have to see if negotiations do occur this coming year under new leaders in Japan and new leaders in a new leader in South Korea, and also new leadership in China. We'll have to see whether Kim Jong-un can be persuaded, or whether his government or his regime can be persuaded to relent and to change direction.
Absolutely.
But it's so far, people are rather disappointed. Their appearances have changed. Personally, he's got a beautiful wife. He's showed up at various events looking rather smiling and pleasant. He's spoken in public a couple of times. But so far, there's no substantive sign of real change.
Absolutely. So I wanted to pick up on that exact same point. If there's no real change in North Korea, then the approach to North Korea has to change. You mentioned on a new leadership in China. Joseph Cheng, do you think we can expect to see any change there?
I tend to agree with what has just been said. First of all, it is very difficult to overthrow the Kim regime. There is a general acceptance that the regime's stability is quite strong. And at the same time, we see no obvious move towards economic reforms. And certainly, there is very little faith that Kim Jong-un, as a very young leader, can be in full grasp of the political and economic situation of the country. I think China certainly would like to prod Pyongyang along onto the road of economic reforms. But apparently, China there's a limit to what China can do. And I think Chinese diplomats has been telling their Western counterparts all the time informally that China can't really exert too much pressure on Pyongyang because the Chinese leadership would not like to damage the relationship in the long term, since Pyongyang is very keen to maintain its independence. What China wants to do, of course, is to exercise a kind of demonstration effect and to give limited aid to Pyongyang to show that China is friendly, to show that China's advice is worth considering.
Paul Chamberlin, let's look at the other body that tries to have some influence over North Korea. Of course, the United Nations Security Council, and we're seeing a meeting later on Wednesday of members of the Security Council. Paul Chamberlin, if we're not going to see any more sanctions, what can be done?
Well, if member nations are not willing to ostracize North Korea to the extent implied by the resolutions, then it's all very questionable. But going back to the challenge that Kim Jong-un faces, even if we were to assume that he, and to be very generous, he and Chang Sung-taek agreed that a major restructuring was necessary to modernize the society, even while trying to keep it an authoritarian state, the question of how to ease the fears of members of the military elite who benefit significantly from the current situation is very important to consider. North Korea has called for security guarantees from the United States and others, and Washington and Seoul have been willing to offer those security guarantees to some extent. But because of the difficulties with transparency and verifiability, those have kind of fallen by the wayside. So they're stuck in a vicious cycle. And whether they have the courage to undertake changes is, to date, is just not apparent. We look at China and its millions and millions of population, billions, I guess, of population, and we think about North Korea with, what, 22 million people? Managing change on the scale of China in North Korea is almost impossible unless the government is willing to change dramatically to become a legitimate government representing the will of the people. Until they do, we're going to be stuck in this kind of vicious cycle that we've been observing for the past few years.
Don Kirk, do you sense any willing on the part of North Korea? Do you think it really is ever interested in becoming a respected member of the international community?
Well, there's a couple of approaches to that. One is that we're often surprised by what happens on the Korean Peninsula. And nobody predicted the Korean War. Nobody predicted the rise of South Korea as a major economic power. Who knows what can really happen, what might really happen in the next few years in North Korea? We could be pleasantly surprised. But on the other hand, as far as China is concerned, China's overwhelming obvious interest is what China keeps on talking about: peace and stability. That ranks ahead of anything else. And as long as China persists in its emphasis on peace and stability, China's going to go on acting more or less as North Korea's defense attorney in debates in the United Nations. China may join in condemning North Korea, but China is not really going to want to take really stringent action against North Korea. When you talk about sanctions, where are those sanctions being violated? They're being violated in the form of goods moving from China into North Korea. Now, China supplies North Korea with a lot of its food, almost all its fuel, and many other items, also some across the border in open legal trade, others in sort of black marketeering trade that is condoned by officials on both sides who are benefiting economically from it, I might add. So we have all that uncertainty about China.
Absolutely. There really are no clear answers. But unfortunately, we've run out of time to try to find one today. Thanks very much to all our guests for a very interesting discussion. In Seoul, we had Don Kirk, in Hong Kong, Joseph Cheng, and in Washington, D.C., Paul Chamberlin.
Thank you.
And thanks very much to you two for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to email us any comments or suggestions, do drop us a line to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.